Good evening, Travala of quiet thoughts. Wherever you are tonight, perhaps lying beneath a calm ceiling, perhaps listening to the steady hum of your own breath, let your mind drift back, far beyond the world of pages and print. This is the story of what humanity did before books existed. A story not of paper and ink, but of memory, rhythm, and firelight. Imagine a world without books. No pages to turn, no libraries to walk through, no ink pressed into paper. Only the hum of the wind, the rhythm of footsteps over earth, the crackling of fire, and voices. Voices telling stories, again and again, until they became part of the air itself. It's night. The stars are the first pages ever written, silent, endless, and full of meaning for those who knew how to read them. Before books, before writing, before symbols at all, humanity's first library was the sky. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, people gathered around a fire. Their world was dark, except for the glow of flames and the silver dust of starlight. An elder spoke perhaps in a language now lost to time, telling the story of where the people came from, how the world began, why the rains fell and the seasons turned. The story was not written. It was remembered. Memory was the oldest technology. Every mind carried archives of songs, genealogies, remedies, maps of rivers and mountains, and the names of ancestors. Knowledge was alive, moving from one mouth to another, reshaped by breath and tone, sustained by repetition. In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples told Dreamtime stories, vast networks of myth and geography woven together through song. A melody could lead someone across deserts, guiding them to waterholes and sacred sites, each verse linked to a point in the landscape. In West Africa, griotas, poets and historians, remembered the lineages of kings and the deeds of entire empires. They were the libraries of their people, able to recall centuries without a single page. Far in the north, Inuit storytellers spoke of the stars, the ice, and the spirits that walked the snow. Their words carried knowledge of the seasons and the dangers of the frozen. World stories that kept their listeners alive. Before books, people didn't just remember stories, they lived inside them. A story was not something you read, it was something you became part of. To forget was to lose a thread in the great web that bound community together. Knowledge had its keepers. Some stories were told only in winter, others only at night. Some were sacred, whispered by elders whose duty was to preserve them unchanged. To remember was an honor. To tell, a responsibility. Rhythm was the tool of memory. Stories took shape in patterns of sound and chants, songs, and repeated lines that made remembering natural. The rhythm carried the words the way a river carries a leaf. That ancient rhythm still lingers in every poem, hymn, and lullaby. Each one a distant echo of a time when speech itself was an instrument. Pictured one of those early storytellers beside a fire. Their hands move as they speak, tracing invisible constellations in the air. Children lean closer, the flames painting light across their faces. The voice rises and falls like a wave. The same story has been told for generations, yet each telling is new, breathing, shifting, alive. These stories were not simply entertainment. They were tools for survival. A song might hold directions to a valley. A tayu might teach which berries heal, and which springs sleep forever. Knowledge was wrapped in narrative, because the human mind remembers stories far longer than it remembers facts. When memory faded, a community lost not only information, but identity. To forget a story was to lose part of oneself. The fear of forgetting became one of the quietest and strongest forces in human history. The seed of writing. Though no one yet knew it, the world was still unwritten. Yet everywhere, words were forming. The wind carved shapes into sand dunes. Rivers drew lines across plains. Lightning left dark marks on stone. The earth itself was a page, and humankind was beginning to read it. The first storytellers must have sensed that connection that the land spoke in signs. The pattern of bird tracks, the path of stars, the spiral of a shell, all these carried meaning before any alphabet existed. Listening was a kind of reading. The world was a book that spoke without ink. Even now, if you close your eyes, you can imagine that sound, a world filled with stories, but not a single written word. The slow crackle of fire, the murmur of voices. The pulse of memory passed from one generation to the next. This was humanity's first library. Not shelves and parchment, but hearts and minds. Each person was a keeper of chapters that could not be seen. To be alive was to remember. Somewhere in that unwritten world, the thought of permanence began to stir. A child perhaps noticed how a stick left lines in the sand, and wondered if the lines could mean something. A hunter might have drawn the outline of an animal on a rock to honor the hunt. or to teach others what he had seen. From that small act, a mark made to preserve, a moment grew the vast history of writing and books. But at that time, it was still only a dream, still only the faint desire to hold a story, still. Night after night, the fire burned. The storytellers spoke. The listeners dreamed, and humanity's oldest form of learning continued slow, gentle, and endless. Now, as your own night stretches quietly around you, imagine the world before words, a world where the sky was a book, the earth was a page, and memory was the ink that never dried. I wonder what kind of stories the air outside your window might carry tonight. Long before books, before letters or words, before even the idea of writing, humans found a way to leave memory behind, not in speech, but in stone. Imagine the world tens of thousands of years ago. The air is colder, sharper, the land stretches wide and untouched, filled with forests, rivers, and plains that no map has ever named. In the distance, smoke curls from a cave mouth. Inside, the walls flicker with firelight, and shapes begin to emerge: animals, hands, spirals, and figures half human, half dream. These were the first stories ever drawn. Not written, not read, but felt. The people who painted them are gone, their names long forgotten, yet their thoughts remain, bound to the cave walls in earth's own pigments: charcoal, ash, ochre, and crushed stone. Some of these images are older than cities, older than agriculture, older even than most species alive today. The caves of Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain, and Sulawesi in Indonesia all hold these marks, made by hands that trembled in torchlight. Deer leap across the walls. Bison lower their heads. Horses run forever through shadow and fire. The drawings seem to move when the light dances across them, as though the artist had discovered animation tens of millennia before film. It's easy to imagine the moment it happened. Someone kneels beside the rock, their breath warm in the cold air. They mix pigment with animal fat, then press a hand against the wall. A cloud of red dust rises, blown gently through a hollow reed. When they pull their hand away, an outline remains: a handprint, glowing against the stone. The first self, a whisper across time that says, "I was here." Every handprint is different. Some are small, belonging to children. Others are long and slender, likely belonging to women. Each one is a mark of presence, a memory turned visible. To us, these might look like art. To them, they may have been something deeper: ritual, belief, communication. Perhaps each animal carried meaning, each shape part of a lesson or prayer. The caves could have been classrooms, shrines, or meeting places. We do not know, and perhaps that mystery is the truest part of their beauty. What we do know is this: the first painters were also the first historians. They captured the world, not in words, but in form, translating experience into image. The walls became memory. The caves became books. When archaeologists explore these ancient chambers today, they must crawl through narrow passages and crawlways to reach the hidden art. The light from their lamps touches drawings that have waited in darkness for tens of thousands of years. And in that quiet, you can almost feel the heartbeat of the people who made them, a silent rhythm that still echoes through time. Some caves have markings that look like patterns, lines, dots, grids, perhaps an early language of symbols. Maybe they recorded numbers of animals hunted, or times of the moon. Maybe they were simply beauty for its own sake, whatever their meaning. They were at the beginning of the written impulse, the human need to record, to organize, to make thought last. The artists did not paint alone. They were surrounded by others, by voices chanting softly, by the glow of fire, by the rhythm of breathing and echo. Sound filled the chamber, bouncing from wall to wall, until the voices and paintings became one living thing. These were the first performances where image and sound danced together. Storytelling was already becoming art, and art was already becoming story. Outside the caves, the world slept under a sky of strange stars. Animals moved through the forest, rivers froze and thawed with the seasons. But within those stone walls, something had changed forever. For the first time, a thought could survive its thinker. When the people left the caves, when they died, or moved on, or forgot their marks remained, the walls remembered what they no longer could. Stone had become a vessel for memory, and memory had become material. That moment, quiet, flickering, eternal, was the true beginning of writing. Each generation would add something new: a line, a shape, a pattern. The walls grew crowded with time. The stories of animals blended with the stories of humans, and soon the difference between them blurred. The cave was a world entire, a mirror of life outside and within. Even now, those drawings survive. Their colors are faded, their edges worn, but they endure with a kind of patience that no book can match. They have waded through ice ages, storms, and silence, and yet they still speak, not in words, but in presence. To stand before them, even in a photograph, is to feel that silence breathing again. It is to know that long before letters or alphabets, humans already sought to speak to the future. Somewhere near you, perhaps in a rock face or an old wall, the earth still holds that same instinct to remember, to mark, to leave a trace. If you look closely enough, you might see the faint outline of a hand, or the shape of an idea waiting to be known. The cave walls. Remember, and in their memory lies the first chapter of all that would follow every scroll, every page, every story ever told. I wonder what stories the ground beneath your home might remember, if it could show its own ancient marks. Before alphabets, before writing systems, there were symbols, small, deliberate marks that stood for ideas, not sounds. They were not yet words, but they were something new. Signs that carried meaning across time and distance. Imagine a smooth piece of bone, carved with lines that repeat in sequence: short, long, or a flat stone covered in spirals and dots. To us, they may look decorative, but to their makers, they were records, tools, perhaps even prayers. These were the first steps toward the language of symbols. It began quietly. Somewhere, a person scratched a pattern into a piece of wood to count something, maybe the days of a hunt, the phases of the moon, or the number of animals seen in a herd. This was not art now. It was memory translated into code. A mark meant a thing. A series of marks meant thought. Archaeologists have found carved bones and stones from over 20,000 years ago, with tally marks etched along their sides. Each mark may have represented a day, an event, or a count of life and death. In those faint scratches, we can see the mind learning how to externalize itself, how to think on a surface instead of only in memory. The human brain was making a discovery as profound as fire or the wheel. That knowledge could live outside the body. In southern Africa, stones covered in repeating crosshatch patterns have been found marks so regular that they suggest intention, not chance. And on cave walls across Europe, tiny symbols appear alongside animals: circles, triangles, grids, and comb-like shapes. These were not drawings of the world, but language about the world. Abstract signs, representing meaning. We can imagine those early symbol makers at work. Perhaps one sits beside a stream, tracing lines in clay with a stick. Another carves small grooves into a piece of bone, turning each one into a record of something remembered. Each mark stands for an experience. The more marks they make, the more the surface begins to speak. The step from symbol to system is a subtle one. Once humans realized that marks could stand for things, the door to writing had opened, even if no one yet knew how wide it would swing. When farming began, around 12,000 years ago, counting became essential. Seeds were stored, harvests measured, trade established. Oral memory could no longer keep pace with the growing complexity of life. So people began to use objects, small clay tokens, shaped like cones, spheres, or discs, each representing a quantity of grain, sheep, or oil. These tokens were the first bookkeeping tools, the ancestors of written numbers. They were used throughout the Fertile Crescent, from the valleys of Mesopotamia to the plains of Persia, long before writing appeared on clay tablets. A collection of tokens was a contract, a promise made physical. But as trade expanded, people needed a way to store those promises permanently. Someone, perhaps in a bustling village near the Euphrates, began pressing the tokens into a lump of wet clay, leaving their shapes behind before sealing them inside. Soon they realized that the impressions alone, the marks themselves, could represent the goods without needing the actual objects. That moment was revolutionary. Symbols had replaced reality. Each mark became a sign, a tiny shadow of something larger, and human civilization would never be the same again. This was the beginning of abstract thought in written form. No longer did one need to carry a herd of sheep to prove ownership. A single clay tablet with the right impressions could speak on your behalf. It was the first contract, the first document, the first whisper of bureaucracy. Those who could read these marks held power. A new kind of knowledge was forming, one that no longer relied entirely on memory, bad on record. And yet, the magic of symbols was that they still carried something personal, something human. Every mark was made by hand, every line pressed into clay with intention. It is humbling to think that the same impulse that led a child to doodle in sand once led an ancient farmer to press a cone-shaped token into clay to count his grain. The instinct to record, to represent, to make meaning visible, It is as old as humanity itself. Over generations, the marks grew more sophisticated. They began to link together, combining shapes to represent not just things, but actions and relationships. Symbols became messages. Messages became sentences. And writing was slowly, quietly being born. It did not begin in a single place or moment. Across the world, people found their own ways to give form to thought. In the Indus Valley, seals were carved with tiny, elegant signs whose meanings are still a mystery. In China, early characters appeared on shells and bones used for divination. In Mesopotamia, the marks of tokens evolved into the wedge-shaped impressions we now call cuneiform. Each of these systems was unique, yet all were bound by the same discovery, that marks could carry language, and language could travel through time. It is strange to think how fragile those first writings were. A bit of clay, a carved bone, a painted symbol. Yet through them, the past began to leave its footprints behind. And still, when we look at those ancient signs, the tallies, spirals, grids, and impressions, they do not feel cold or distant. They feel human. They are the earliest moments of conversation between the living and the unborn. Every mark, every carved line, was a message meant for someone who did not yet exist. A gift across centuries. If you were to hold one of those clay tokens in your hand, you might feel the faint ridges of a thumbprint pressed there thousands of years ago. Someone once rolled that piece of clay between their palms, thinking of the same thing you are thinking of now. How to make a thought last. Somewhere near you, the night carries its own quiet symbols. The outlines of buildings, the shapes of trees against the dark, the way lights form lines along the street. All of it language, all of it memory, written in form. The dawn of symbols never ended. It simply changed its surface, from stone to clay, from ink to digital light. The human urge remains the same, to make marks that speak. The story of writing began not with poets or philosophers, but with farmers and merchants. Its first words were not songs or prayers. They were numbers. They were counts of grain, of sheep, of jars of oil. Before writing became art, it was accounting. Around 5,000 years ago, in the wide river valleys of Mesopotamia, the clay tablet became humanity's first notebook. Soft and plentiful, clay was the perfect medium for marking, erasing, and reshaping thought. A stylus made of reed was pressed into its surface, leaving small, wedge-shaped impressions. Each wedge was a sign simple at first, then increasingly intricate. This was cuneiform, the first true script known to history. It began as a way to track trade. A temple might record how many goats had been offered, how much barley was owed, or how many workers labored in a field. But over time, those marks began to speak of more than quantities. They began to describe events, names, and stories. Clay learned to speak. Imagine a scribe sitting cross-legged on a warm floor near the Euphrates River. The air smells faintly of dust and baked earth. He holds a small tablet in one hand and a stylus in the other. Each stroke he presses into the clay carries meaning. A city's name, a weight, a measure, a god's symbol. His work is quiet, but immense. He is shaping memory for his civilization. When the tablet is filled, it is laid out in the sun to dry. Some are later baked in kilns, hardening into near eternity. Thousands of years later, they will still speak, still hold the faint touch of human intention. Cuneiform evolved over centuries, growing from pictographs, little drawings of things, into abstract symbols that represented sounds. This shift from picture to phonetic sign was a revolution. It meant that writing could now represent any word, not just visible objects. It could describe ideas, emotions, and even names. For the first time, language once confined to breath and sound was freed from the body. It could now exist on its own, carried in clay, surviving the death of the speaker. We often imagine early writing as dry or dull, but it was anything but that. It was filled with wonder. A trader could now send a message to a faraway city and have his exact words understood. A king could command across distances. A priest could preserve a prayer for generations. Writing turned speech into something eternal. The earliest known story ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh, came from these same clay tablets. It told of friendship, loss, and the search for immortality. The irony is beautiful. The very story that longed for eternal life achieved it. Not through gods or magic, but through writing itself. Think about that. Humanity's oldest surviving story is about wanting to live forever, and the act of writing gave it exactly that. Across the same centuries, in the Nile Valley, another great invention was taking shape. Egyptians developed their own way to preserve words, hieroglyphs. T word means sacred carvings. Each hieroglyph was a small image, a bird, an eye, a reed. But together, they formed sentences and thoughts. Unlike cuneiform, hieroglyphs were not pressed, but carved or painted. They adorned temple walls, tombs, and monuments. To the Egyptians, writing was a divine act, a bridge between the world of the living and the afterlife. Their god of writing, Thoth, was believed to have given humans the gift of the written word. Through it, one could speak to eternity. Inside tombs, hieroglyphs told stories meant for the soul's journey, spells, hymns, and memories. In a way, every tomb became a library, a personal archive of the life that had been. Over time, Egyptian scribes simplified hieroglyphs into hieratic and then Demaic scripts faster. More practical forms used for letters, trade, and administration. Writing was no longer only sacred. It became a living part of daily life. Everywhere writing appeared, it reshaped the world. It created new classes of people, scribes, record keepers, scholars. It separated the fleeting from the permanent, and it gave rulers a new kind of power. The ability to make their words law, carved in stone for all to see. But the true wonder of these early systems was not in their complexity, it was in their intent. Each mark was an attempt to make thought endure. Each tablet, each carved wall, was a whisper from one human mind to another across time. If you close your eyes, you might imagine the sound of a reed stylus tapping against clay, gentle, rhythmic, patient. The scribe works steadily, marking symbols that will one day be buried in the earth and found again by hands not yet born. He does not know he is making history. He only knows he must record it. Outside, the world hums softly, the rustle of palm leaves, the murmur of a distant market, the quiet lap of the river. And there, in the midst of it all, someone is teaching clay how to remember. The world was learning to write, but not yet to read as we do. Knowledge was still the privilege of the few, guarded, specialized, sacred, yet change was on the horizon. The alphabet was waiting to be born, and with it, a new simplicity that would bring words closer to every voice. The next great turning point in human history was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. A set of letters, tiny shapes, each carrying a sound, each one simple enough to learn, yet together powerful enough to capture every word a person could speak. This was the alphabet, a quiet miracle that changed everything. Before alphabets, writing was complex, reserved for specialists. Cuneiform had hundreds of symbols, hieroglyphs even more. To master them was to devote a lifetime to memorization and ritual. But around 4,000 years ago, in the lands between Egypt and Mesopotamia, traders began to simplify things. They didn't need the language of priests or kings. They needed something fast, efficient, and easy to use. So they did something extraordinary. They took a handful of symbols, each representing a sound, and strung them together to form words. No more pictures of cows or birds. Now, the sound B could be shown by one mark, A by another, T by a third, and together, bat. It was the first alphabetic writing system, likely created by the Semitic-speaking peoples of the Sinai Peninsula. From those simple beginnings, the world's letters were born. The idea spread like fire along the trade routes. The Phoenicians, great sailors and merchants of the Mediterranean, adopted it and made it their own. They carried it across the sea, from port to distant lands. Everywhere they went, they left behind not just goods, but symbols, marks that would evolve into alphabets we still use today. The Greeks took the Phoenician script and added vowels. Suddenly, writing could mirror the full melody of speech. It could capture poetry, philosophy, emotion. What had once been a tool of trade became a tool of thought. In the cool stone halls of early Greece, philosophers began writing their ideas down. Before that, wisdom had been sung by memory, spoken by rhapsodes, and passed through generations by repetition. Now, a thinker could stop, reflect, and record his thoughts permanently. The alphabet gave birth to reflection itself. It also gave birth to democracy. For when words could be written simply enough for anyone to learn, the gate of knowledge began to open. The written word was no longer the secret of scribes. It became a shared instrument of the people. In Greece, writing was not only practical, it was beautiful. Letters were carved into marble and painted on pottery, written on wax tablets and papyrus scrolls. The alphabet made language visible, but it also made it art. Every curve of an alpha, every stroke of an omega, was drawn with care and rhythm. As centuries passed, the Greek alphabet inspired others. The Etruscans took it, changed it, and passed it to the Romans, who shaped it into what we now call the Latin alphabet. That same alphabet, with small adjustments, is the one you're reading at this very moment. A continuous thread stretches from a Phoenician trader's brushstroke to the words glowing softly before you now. It is an astonishing thought that each letter, A, B, C, carries within it thousands of years of human invention. They have survived empires, wars, and oceans, yet remain unchanged in their essence. Each one a symbol of permanence, born from writing, once carved in stone or pressed into clay, now flowed freely on papyrus. Papyrus, the gift of the Nile, was light, flexible, and easy to carry. It allowed words to move faster than ever before. Messages could now travel from Alexandria to Athens, from Rome to the far reaches of the empire. In the hands of scribes, alphabets gave life to libraries. The most famous of all, the Library of Alexandria, was said to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Within its walls, scholars from around the world gathered to study, translate, and write. Knowledge was no longer just for survival. It had become a form of devotion. Imagine walking through those halls, the quiet rustle of scrolls being unrolled, the scratch of a red pen dipped in ink, the warm smell of papyrus and oil lamps. Outside, the Mediterranean breeze drifts through the open courtyards, and the sea glimmers like a sheet of polished glass. Inside, thought itself is being copied and preserved, one careful letter at a time. The alphabet made such work possible. It was the great equalizer of language, adaptable, portable, and profoundly human. Anyone could learn it. Anyone could use it to think, to question, to dream. But there was something else, something quieter, yet deeper. The alphabet didn't just change how people wrote it changed how they thought. When humans began to see sounds as symbols, they began to see ideas as things that could be shaped, rearranged, improved. Writing turned thought into a visible process. It allowed reason to unfold on the page, one line at a time. You can still feel that echo today, every time you write a word. Your hand follows the same invisible tradition. Symbols once scratched into clay, now traced on glowing screens. The medium has changed, but the movement is the same. Mark, pause, think, mark again. And just like that, the alphabet that freed the word continues to free the mind. Outside your own window tonight, letters rest quietly everywhere, glowing on street signs, bookshelves, and screens. They wait, patient and silent, until a human eye gives them voice again. The alphabet was never just a tool. It was a doorway, one that opened from the world of memory into the world of imagination. Once the alphabet had given humans the power to capture language, the next great challenge was how to carry it. Clay tablets were strong but heavy. Stone carvings were eternal but fixed in place. Human thought had learned to live on surfaces. Now it needed to travel. So, quietly, another revolution began, one that rolled knowledge into spirals and sent it across the world. This was the age of scrolls. In the sunlit workshops of ancient Egypt, long strips of papyrus reeds were being harvested from the banks of the Nile. The reeds were sliced thin, soaked, and pressed in layers, one running horizontally, one vertically. When dried, the sheets formed a pale, flexible surface, strong enough to hold ink, light enough to carry in a satchel. It was a miracle of its time. Paper before paper existed. Each sheet was joined end to end, forming a long ribbon of thought that could be rolled up and stored. Thus, the scroll was born, the first truly portable library of the ancient world. Scribes filled them with everything from tax records to poetry, from royal decrees to hymns for the gods. Some scrolls stretched over 30 feet long, unrolling like a river of words. When a reader wanted to consult a passage, they would unroll the scroll from one end and roll it up again from the other, reading by lamplight or under the shade of a courtyard fig tree. The scroll gave writing movement. It turned the static act of reading into something rhythmic, almost musical. The rustle of papyrus, the soft creak of the roll. It was as though the text itself breathed with the motion of the hands. Across the Mediterranean, the scroll became the vessel of civilization. In Greece, philosophers wrote treatises that would shape centuries of thought. In Rome, poets inscribed verses of love and empire. In Israel and Egypt, sacred texts were copied with care so precise that each letter was treated as holy. Every scroll carried a fragment of the world, a whisper of memory wrapped in reeds. Imagine walking through the narrow streets of Alexandria as the sun sets. The air is warm and dry, and a young scribe hurries home with a bundle of scrolls tied in leather cord. He knows that inside them are ideas that have crossed oceans, words written by thinkers he will never meet, yet whose voices speak clearly through ink and fiber. He carries them as one might carry light. The Library of Alexandria, Adit Sayet, was said to hold 500,000 of these scrolls, Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, organized by language, subject, and author. Every ship that entered the city's harbor was searched, and any scrolls found on board were borrowed, copied, and added to the collection. Knowledge was being gathered, preserved, and multiplied. But scrolls were fragile. A single spark could undo a lifetime of thought. Papyrus cracked with age and crumbled in humidity. So scribes made copies again and again, each generation rewriting the words of those who came before. It was through this repetition that ancient texts survived, not through permanence, but through devotion. Even so, the act of copying was not just mechanical, it was spiritual. Each scribe saw their work as a dialogue with the past. When they dipped their reeds into ink, they joined a chain that stretched back through centuries. They were not just preserving memory, they were keeping time itself alive. In monasteries and temples, in libraries and markets, scrolls became the arteries of civilization. They carried philosophy, law, art, and science across continents. They connected empires that never met face to face. To read was to travel, to write was to send part of oneself into the future. It is easy to forget now, when words appear and disappear with the touch of a screen, what a marvel a scroll once was. To hold one was to hold months of labor, the careful work of harvesting, pressing, drying, cutting, and writing. Every line of ink was a collaboration between nature and hand, between thought and time. In some ancient homes, scrolls were stored in clay jars, sealed to protect them from insects and damp. Others were wrapped in cloth and placed on wooden racks, labeled with small tags called syllabos, inscribed with the title or author's name. Even then, humans longed for order, for the ability to find, to reference, to return. Knowledge was becoming something to be managed. But with that came a question. How long could something so delicate survive? Could wisdom truly last on such fragile skin? And so, in hidden corners of the ancient world, new experiments began. Instead of rolling words, what if they could be folded, bound, and turned page by page? The scroll had carried us through centuries of enlightenment, but the future was waiting in the form of the codex, the ancestor of the modern book. The change would seem small at first, a shift in shape, but it would alter everything about how humans read and remembered. Somewhere, perhaps in the first century of our era, a monk or scholar took sheets of parchment, stacked them neatly, and sewed them together at one edge. He had unknowingly created the first book, but that is a story for another night. A story of bindings and pages, of margins filled with whispers, and of words that learned to rest flat in our hands. The scroll, though, should not be forgotten. Its legacy lives in every rolled-up map, every unfurled chart, every sacred scroll still kept in temples and museums around the world. It reminds us that knowledge was once something you could unroll, slowly, reverently, like a prayer. Outside your own window tonight, the world may seem still, but somewhere, perhaps in a library, a study, or a quiet corner of your home, a story waits to be unrolled, and in that motion, the ancient rhythm of the scroll continues. There came a time when the scroll, elegant, ancient, and time-tested, began to feel too long, too fragile, too unwieldy for the growing ambitions of human thought. People wanted to find passages quickly, to turn from one idea to another, without unrolling and re-rolling for hours. Knowledge, now vast and ever-expanding, needed a new form, and so, almost quietly, a transformation began. It happened not in grand palaces or famous cities, but in workshops, monasteries, and small corners of the Roman Empire. Sheets of parchment, made from stretched and treated animal skin, were stacked, folded, and sewn together along one edge. A piece of wood was placed at the front, another at the back, and the bundle was tied shut with leather cord. This was the Codex, the world's first true book. The Codex was revolutionary not because it held new ideas, but because it changed how humans interacted with ideas. Unlike scrolls, which had to be read linearly from beginning to end, codices allowed a reader to turn pages to move back and forth through knowledge. For the first time, information had a geography. The beginning, middle, and end could be felt between one's fingers. Imagine the first person to flip through such a creation. The texture of parchment beneath the hand, the faint crackle of ink dried on the surface, the soft creak of leather binding. Each page a door, each turn a choice. It must have felt like magic. The Codex was durable, practical, and deeply human. It could be opened flat, read easily, and stored neatly. It didn't need to be rolled or unrolled. It waited patiently, like a companion, for the reader's return. Christians in the early centuries of the Common Era adopted the Codex eagerly. For them, it was not only convenient, it was symbolic. The Codex could hold many writings together between two covers, giving unity to sacred texts. Soon, the scriptures themselves took this form, and the image of the book began to carry spiritual weight. In time, libraries filled with bound volumes rather than scrolls. The old rolls of papyrus, so graceful in their spirals, began to fade into history. In their place rose shelves lined with codices, thick, sturdy, and silent. The book had been born, but this new form came with new challenges. Parchment, though stronger than papyrus, was laborious to produce. Each sheet required the skin of an animal, cleaned, stretched, and polished until smooth. An entire herd might be needed to create one large manuscript. And then came the writing itself, done by hand, letter by letter, by the patient labor of scribes. Picture a monastery at dawn. The light of candles flickers against stone walls. Rows of monks sit at wooden desks, quills in hand, their inkpots made of clay and horn. Outside, the world sleeps. Inside, words are being copied, not for one generation, but for all that would follow. Every scribe knew that a single mistake could change the meaning of an entire text. So they wrote slowly, deliberately, sometimes whispering each word aloud as they went. Hours turned into days, days into years. Each finished book was not just a copy, it was a devotion, a form of prayer through patience. The margins of those early books tell their own stories. Some contain notes, doodles, even small complaints from weary scribes. My hand aches. The ink is cold. Thank God this page is done. Yet each complaint, written in tiny script between sacred lines, makes those books even more alive. When a codex was complete, it was a treasure. Its pages gleamed faintly with gold leaf. Its cover is often adorned with carved wood or jewels. To own a book was to hold power, beauty, and wisdom all bound together. Kings collected them. Scholars guarded them. Monks prayed over them. In time, the codex became a symbol of civilization itself. Wherever it appeared, it carried the promise of memory. A village without books was a place without a voice in history. The codex also changed the way humans thought. Reading a scroll was an act of performance, linear and continuous, like listening to a story sung aloud. But reading a codex was exploratory. You could pause, compare, cross-reference. Knowledge became something to navigate, and navigation required organization. So came the birth of chapters, indexes, page numbers, and margins. Every innovation we take for granted in modern books began there in those thick, bound pages copied by candlelight. If you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of that age every time you turn a page. That soft, whispering sound of parchment against parchment. It is the sound of centuries folding over themselves, one page becoming another. Somewhere, deep in a monastery or hidden library, a single book could take a lifetime to make, but those lifetimes added up. Together, they formed the foundation of written culture as we know it. When a monk lifted his pen, he wasn't only writing letters. He was keeping civilization from vanishing into silence. And as centuries passed, the codex spread far beyond the monasteries into universities, palaces, and private homes. Its power grew. Its form became familiar. Soon, it would no longer need to be made by hand. A new invention was waiting, one that would take the book from the hands of the few and give it to the world. But before we reach that moment of printing and press, let us pause here, in the quiet between two pages, where light glows softly across parchment, and a quill rests beside the ink. The story of writing has reached its middle chapters, and humanity is preparing to turn the page once more. By the time the codex became the heart of learning, the world had entered a quieter age, one where words moved not through voices in the streets, but through ink in the shadows. The grand libraries of the ancient world, Alexandria, Pergamon, Antioch, had long since fallen or faded. In their place rose humbler sanctuaries, monasteries, and candlelit cells where the written word was guarded like a flame in winter. These were not bustling centers of trade or empire. They were places of silence and patience. Each day, a monk might rise before dawn, wash his hands, and step into the script. Their rows of wooden desks stood in stillness. Quills rested in their holders. The air smelled faintly of wax, dust, and drying ink. There was no sound but the soft scratch of pen on parchment. Hours passed like slow tides. These scribes were not authors, not in the modern sense. They rarely created, they preserved, they copied what others had written: Homer, Plato, Virgil, Augustine, Aristotle. every word precious, every letter a seed of civilization. It was a labor of devotion. Some copied scripture, some science, some histories no one else remembered, and in that quiet act of repetition, they became the guardians of memory. Many of the books we now call ancient, the ones scholars study and readers quote, exist today only because a nameless monk once decided they were worth saving. 1,000 years of culture survived through 1,000 patient hands. Yet this preservation came at a cost. Every copy took months, sometimes years. Each scribe could produce only a few books in a lifetime. And when war or fire destroyed entire libraries, whole generations of thought vanished in an instant. Knowledge, for centuries, lived at the mercy of chance. Still, within those monastic walls, something beautiful happened. The act of writing became a form of prayer. The page became a place of meditation. A single illuminated letter, drawn in gold, framed with blue and crimson vines, might take days to complete. Artists bent over their work, painting halos of saints, miniature beasts, and curling leaves that wound through the margins like living vines. Each book became both a vessel of knowledge and a work of art. When one was finished, it was more than parchment and ink. It was devotion made visible. Imagine standing in such a library. Stone walls rise high above, their windows narrow and arched. Dust floats in the thin shafts of sunlight. Books, chained to desks, or resting in alcoves, line the room like sleeping animals. Every spine has its own scent. Every title, a secret world. No voices echo there, yet the silence feels alive, as if every book is breathing softly in its slumber. These were the silent libraries, where human thought endured, not through noise or fame, but through stillness. Even kings and emperors came to respect them. They sent messengers with gold, asking for copies of sacred or scientific works, but the monks rarely hurried. A book, they believed, should be written as carefully as a prayer, and sometimes, amid their routine, they added little traces of their lives. Notes in the margins. The ink froze today. The abbot scolded me for spilling wine on the parchment. Or pray for me, dear reader, for my eyes grow dim. Those small voices, half complaint, half confession, became the most human parts of the books. They remind us that every page of history was once touched by real hands, tired eyes, and hearts that believed in something lasting. But not all who copied words did so in monasteries, in the cities of the Islamic Golden Age. Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, another kind of scribe was at work. Their knowledge was not hidden behind monastery walls, but celebrated in open halls of learning. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad gathered scholars from across the world, Greek, Persian, Indian, Arab, translating and expanding the texts that Europe had nearly forgotten. While monks preserved, these scholars illuminated. They commented, calculated, compared. From their pens came advances in medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics, the very foundation of modern science. Books, once sacred objects, were now instruments of discovery. The written word had begun to move again, to spread, to evolve. And yet, even in these bright centers of learning, the method was still slow. Every letter still traced by hand, every idea still fragile, bound to the pace of ink and human patience. The world was ready for something faster, something that could take the careful work of scribes and multiply it 1,000-fold. But before that revolution could come, before ink met metal and presses thundered, humanity spent one last age in ink and quiet devotion, an age of patience before the storm of invention. In that stillness, the written word waited. It had survived empires, fires, and centuries of silence. And now, it was about to find its voice again, louder than ever before. The quiet centuries of handwritten words came to a turning point, a moment that would forever alter the rhythm of human thought. It began not in a royal court or an ancient library, but in a small workshop filled with the scent of oil, metal, and ink. There, around the year 1440, a man named Johannes Gutenberg worked with restless patience. He was not a monk, nor a scholar of great fame. He was a craftsman, part inventor, part dreamer, and he had an idea that would give the written word its wings. Until then, every book in Europe had been made by hand. A single Bible could take a year to copy. Only the wealthy nobles, scholars, churches could afford them. The common person might live and die without ever holding one. But Gutenberg imagined something radical. A machine that could print letters instead of writing them. Not one at a time. Not one book at a time, but many. He studied how wine presses worked, how coins were stamped, how ink clung to metal. He experimented with molds, alloys, and oils. Day after day, he adjusted, failed, and tried again. His neighbors must have heard strange sounds from his workshop. The clank of metal, the hiss of ink, the soft thud of paper pressing against type. And then, one quiet morning, the first words emerged. Not from a pen, but from a press. Movable type, small blocks of metal, each with a single raised letter, could be arranged, inked, and pressed onto paper, then rearranged again to form new pages. A book that once took months could now be printed in days. It was a miracle made of iron and patience. Gutenberg's first masterpiece was the Gutenberg Bible, a work of beauty and precision. Its pages glowed with crisp black letters, evenly spaced, elegantly aligned. To hold it was to feel both the weight of the past and the hum of something new. Few inventions in human history would prove as powerful. For the first time, knowledge could travel farther than any messenger, faster than any ship. Ideas were no longer chained to monasteries or guarded by kings. They began to move freely, boldly, into the hands of the people. Printers sprang up across Europe. In Italy, Venice became a hub of the printed word, its presses churning through the night. In Germany, France, and England, scholars raced to publish, translate, and share. Books that had been locked in Latin were now printed in local tongues. A farmer could read a psalm. A merchant could study a map. A curious child could hold in their hands the same words once reserved for the elite. The world, once whispered through scribes and scrolls, had begun to speak aloud. But change is never peaceful. The printing press was not just a tool, it was a spark. It challenged the guardians of old knowledge. It questioned what should be printed, and who should decide. Religious authorities worried that sacred texts, once confined to learned interpreters, would be misunderstood by common readers. Kings feared that pamphlets could spread rebellion faster than armies could march. Writers themselves wondered if the flood of printed pages would cheapen the art of writing. And yet, the tide could not be stopped. Martin Luther's words, once nailed to a church door in protest, were printed and reprinted across Europe within weeks. Galileo's ideas about the stars found their way into the hands of students far from Italy. The Renaissance, that great flowering of art, science, and philosophy, was carried on the back of the printed word. For the first time in human history, knowledge began to multiply instead of fade. Where one book was burned, 10 more could appear. Where one voice was silenced, 1,000 could echo. The press became not just a machine, but a heartbeat, a rhythm that pulsed through the modern world. Still, if you closed your eyes in one of those early printing houses, it was not a sound of chaos you'd hear. It was steady rhythmic. The soft thump of the press, the shuffle of pages drying on racks, the murmured counting of printed sheets. It was a sound almost like breathing, the breath of knowledge itself. And while cities filled with presses and inkstand hands, there were those who still found comfort in the old ways. The monks who once copied words by candlelight now illuminated printed pages with golden edges. Artists painted the borders of machine-made Bibles. Scribes, though no longer the keepers of all knowledge, became the decorators of its beauty. Humanity did not abandon its past, it built upon it. Gutenberg's invention did more than multiply books. It multiplied voices. Every thinker could now reach beyond the walls of their time. Every generation could speak to the next more clearly than ever before. And yet, as the presses thundered and the world grew louder with words, a new question began to rise quietly in the background. Would we remember how to listen? For the first time, humanity had created more words than it could ever read in one lifetime. The problem was no longer the loss of knowledge, it was its abundance. The printed world had begun, but in the shadows of its triumph, the ancient silence, the kind that once filled caves, temples, and monasteries, began to fade. And so, as the presses clattered and the pages piled high, the world turned its gaze toward something entirely new: how to manage the very flood of thought it had unleashed. The age of scarcity had ended. The age of information had begun. With the printing press transforming the world, books no longer whispered in silence. They shouted across towns, nations, and continents. The written word had escaped the quiet of monasteries and study halls. It now moved with energy, curiosity, and unstoppable momentum. In the streets of Renaissance Europe, printed pamphlets began to circulate like sparks in dry grass. Political debates, scientific discoveries, and religious arguments once confined to small circles of scholars now spread rapidly among ordinary people. A letter from Italy could travel to Paris in weeks, influencing minds far from its origin. Consider the impact on literacy. Before printing, reading was a skill mostly reserved for the elite. Afterward, common people could learn to read, to explore, to interpret. Education expanded, and with it, the horizon of human thought. The voices of writers, thinkers, and dreamers were no longer solitary. They entered conversation with millions of others, across borders, languages, and cultures. Ideas became living entities, shared and debated, reshaped by every mind that encountered them. It was also a time of wonder. Explorers like Columbus and Magellan could leave journals and maps that inspired future adventurers. Scientists like Copernicus and Vesalius could document the stars and the human body for generations to study. Artists and philosophers found audiences they had never imagined. Every book became a bridge between the past and the future. A historian in Florence could read the works of Aristotle centuries after they were first written. A poet in London could study Dante's verses long after the fires of the medieval world had faded. And yet, even in this age of abundance, there remained a quiet beauty in the solitary act of reading. No matter how many copies existed, every person who opened a book experienced a private dialogue. The printed page, though multiplied, still demanded attention, reflection, and imagination. Libraries grew in response to this new flood of words. Majestic halls with high ceilings, rows of shelves, and ladders stretching like vines became temples of thought. In France, the Bibliothèque Nationale collected manuscripts and printed works alike, preserving both the ancient and the new. In England, Oxford, and Cambridge amassed volumes that scholars would study for centuries. And beyond Europe, other cultures adapted printing in their own ways. In China, movable type had been experimented with centuries earlier, and the invention of woodblock printing allowed texts to reach wider audiences. Korea developed metal movable type long before Europe, producing books that were both durable and intricate. Printing, in every culture, created a profound ripple. Knowledge became communal. Ideas were no longer guarded secrets. They were shared, challenged, and built upon. The very shape of society began to change. New genres emerged. Novels, newspapers, stories could now explore the human heart, the stars, the mysteries of history, and the wonders of distant lands. Science could be catalogued systematically. Commerce could be organized efficiently. Yet even as books multiplied, the human mind faced a challenge as old as language itself. How to remember, how to prioritize, how to absorb the growing sea of information. Some turned to libraries as havens, others to careful note-taking, indexes, and summaries. Even the printed word, powerful as it was, demanded care and attention. It is easy to imagine a scholar in this age, by candlelight, sitting at a desk, surrounded by open volumes. The smell of ink and paper fills the air. Each book is a voice from a distant time or place. Each turn of the page is a conversation with the past, a dialogue with the present, and a message to the future. And yet, despite the noise of printers, presses, and bustling streets, there is a lingering quiet. The same quiet that once filled caves, scroll rooms, and monastic scripts. It is the quiet of contemplation, the quiet of turning a page slowly, of savoring a thought, of letting knowledge settle like gentle snow. Printing had changed the world, but reading, the intimate act of holding words in the mind, remains sacred. In this new world of voices, humanity began to realize the true power of the written word. It was not only to record or preserve, it was to connect, to inspire, to challenge, and to transform. Every book, every pamphlet, every printed letter was a voice reaching out across time. And when we open a book today, we join those voices, the scribes, the monks, the printers, the thinkers, in a continuum that began thousands of years ago. From the scratch marks on bone to the movable type of Gutenberg, the story of human knowledge is a story of care, patience, and imagination. Every word ever written is a testament to the human desire to be remembered, to be understood, to reach across the centuries. And even now, in the quiet of your own space, as you read these words, you are part of that story. The voices of the past meet your own, and the conversation continues. As centuries passed, the printed word continued to spread, and with it, the idea of gathering knowledge in one place became more vital than ever. Libraries, once small collections of scrolls or manuscripts, began to grow into monumental institutions, temples of thought, open to those who sought to learn. In the grand reading halls of Europe, the modern library took shape. Towers of books reached to word-high ceilings, ladders slid across shelves, and soft light fell through tall windows onto polished wooden desks. The air was filled with a subtle mixture of old paper, leather bindings, and the quiet hum of readers lost in thought. Here, knowledge was no longer the privilege of the elite or the secret of monastic scribes. It belonged to everyone willing to enter and explore. libraries became more than storage for books. They became training grounds for the mind. Catalogs were created to guide readers through vast collections, indexes to locate ideas, and systems to organize countless volumes. The Dewey Decimal System, for instance, brought order to the seemingly endless sea of knowledge, allowing seekers to navigate information with clarity. Consider the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., with its millions of books, manuscripts, maps, and recordings. Each item, whether ancient or modern, is a bridge connecting the present with centuries of thought. Every volume preserved represents a life dedicated to learning, recording, or interpreting the world. And yet, the library is not only a place of books, it is a sanctuary of curiosity. A reader might wander through shelves of history, literature, science, and art, picking up one idea after another, discovering connections never imagined. Each step through the library is like traveling through time, across civilizations, and into the minds of those long gone. Modern libraries also became instruments of equality. Access to books meant access to ideas, a key to understanding the world beyond one's own experience. Libraries offered a quiet space where anyone could read, reflect, and learn. They transformed societies by nurturing informed citizens, thinkers, and dreamers. Beyond the physical halls, libraries began to expand digitally. The whispers of scrolls, codices, and printed books evolved into electronic databases and online archives. Information now flows at the speed of thought, yet the purpose remains the same: to preserve, to share, to inspire. And yet, even in the modern library, the essence of ancient devotion persists. Every book, every record, every digital archive carries the labor, imagination, and care of countless individuals. We continue the tradition of scribes, printers, and librarians, protecting the wisdom of the past for the generations of tomorrow. Imagine yourself walking through a vast library today. You pause to lift a heavy book from a shelf. Its pages whisper stories of distant lands, forgotten civilizations, and brilliant minds. The quiet of the library wraps around you, echoing the same reverence that once filled monastic scriptoria and ancient halls of learning. Even in our noisy, fast-moving world, these spaces remind us of the power of patience, reflection, and the written word. They are places where one can touch history, communicate with the past, and let imagination roam freely. And in this quiet, humanity realizes something profound. Knowledge is more than information. It is a conversation across time. It is the voice of those who came before, speaking to us, guiding us, inspiring us to think, to learn, and to create. The modern library, in its silent grandeur, carries the legacy of thousands of years, from the marks on cave walls to the scrolls of Egypt, from codices to printed Bibles, and from early print workshops to digital archives. The human story is written, preserved, and shared in these spaces. And so, every time you open a book, step into a library, or even click through a digital archive, you join that continuum. You become a part of the unbroken chain of curiosity, imagination, and devotion that has carried human knowledge across millennia. The guardians of knowledge, past and present, have left us this gift: the ability to explore, to learn, and to understand our world. And in that exploration, the quiet heartbeat of history continues to echo. For thousands of years, knowledge traveled slowly, from cave walls to scrolls, from codices to printed books. Each generation carefully preserved the wisdom of the past. Each step required patience, labor, and time. Then came the digital age, an age in which knowledge became instant, portable, and omnipresent. The quiet rhythm of scribes and printers evolved into the constant hum of electricity, the soft glow of screens, and the instantaneous click of a mouse. Imagine, for a moment, holding a device smaller than a book, but containing more knowledge than the grandest libraries of the Renaissance. Every question, every story, every map and idea is there, waiting for your eyes. The wisdom of millennia, compressed into light and code, fits into the palm of your hand. The internet became the ultimate library. It broke the walls of physical spaces, making knowledge accessible to anyone, anywhere, at any time. A child in a remote village could read Shakespeare. A student could study the stars without leaving home. A curious mind could explore the architecture of ancient Rome in vivid detail. And yet, even in this flood of information, the essence of the past remains. Digital libraries are built upon centuries of human labor. The codices copied by monks, the printed works pressed in Renaissance workshops, the careful preservation of ancient scrolls. Every click, every download, every digital page connects us to that long history. In this age, the act of learning has changed, but it is no less sacred. We may scroll instead of unrolling, swipe instead of turning, click instead of flipping, but the rhythm is similar. Curiosity guides, the hand, the mind absorbs, and memory preserves. Digital archives allow us to travel through time effortlessly. We can witness the construction of the pyramids, read letters from explorers across the oceans, or see the illuminated pages of medieval manuscripts, all without leaving our chairs. The walls of the modern library have become infinite. The shelves stretch beyond sight, and every reader can navigate them at will. Yet, with this abundance comes a new challenge: attention. Where once a scribe's careful copying demanded focus and patience, now we are surrounded by an endless sea of information. To read, to understand, to truly absorb, requires intention. We must choose what to explore, just as our ancestors carefully selected which texts to preserve and study. The digital age has also revived the human desire to connect. We share ideas across continents in moments, collaborate on discoveries, and create new knowledge together. The conversation across generations, once slow and deliberate, now flows continuously, linking past, present, and future. Still, amidst the rapid movement of data, there is a quiet joy reminiscent of older times. Opening a digital manuscript, watching a photograph of an ancient scroll, or tracing a digitized map evokes the same wonder felt by the first humans who marked symbols on clay, parchment, or paper. The lineage is clear. Every modern reader is part of a chain stretching back to the first attempts to preserve thought. In the palm of your hand, you now hold more than information. You hold a history of human ingenuity, patience, and curiosity. You hold the voices of scribes, the whispers of monasteries, the echo of printing presses, and the quiet reverence of libraries through the ages. Even in the glow of a screen, the heartbeat of history persists. It reminds us that knowledge is more than data. It is connection, memory, and imagination. And as we move through this digital age, we continue the story begun by those first marks on clay. We are not just readers. We are part of the continuum. We are custodians of the past and creators of the future. The world of knowledge has never been closer, yet it calls for reflection, care, and attention, the same virtues that guided scribes, printers, and librarians before us. In this age, the story of human learning continues, unfolding faster than ever before, yet echoing the same patient devotion of millennia. Even as books multiplied and libraries grew, one truth remained constant. Humans have always been storytellers. Long before the first marks were scratched into clay or ink pressed onto paper, voices carried stories across generations. Songs, myths, parables, and tales spoken under starlit skies, around campfires, and in the quiet corners of homes, shaped human memory, culture, and imagination. Oral tradition is a testament to human ingenuity. Without the written word, knowledge survived in rhythms, rhymes, and repeated patterns. Memories were structured in ways that made them easy to recall, ensuring that survival skills, history, and beliefs were passed faithfully from one generation to the next. A story of a great hunt, a journey across deserts, or the deeds of a hero became a living thread, binding communities together. Even with the invention of the alphabet, scrolls, and codices, storytelling did not disappear. Instead, it evolved alongside written records. Storytellers, minstrels, and poets complemented libraries by providing context, emotion, and interpretation. While the scholar preserved knowledge in ink, the storyteller brought it to life. Now, in the digital age, the rhythm of oral tradition finds new forms. Podcasts, audiobooks, video recordings, and virtual storytelling platforms echo the ancient practice of voice. A tale that once traveled by mouth across villages can now reach millions across continents in minutes. The human voice, with all its nuance and emotion, bridges the gap between past and present, connecting us intimately with ideas that could once only be read or remembered. Consider the way children today might listen to a bedtime story from a speaker or screen. The cadence, pauses, and tone convey as much meaning as the words themselves. It mirrors the ancient practice of oral storytelling, where memory, imagination, and voice intertwine to preserve culture. The digital world has allowed storytelling to become both immediate and eternal. A single recording can be shared endlessly, archived indefinitely, and revisited at will. This is not so different from the preservation work of monks, scribes, and printers, only faster, wider, and more dynamic. Yet, the core principle remains unchanged. Humans seek to understand their world through narrative, whether carved in stone, written on papyrus, bound in a codex, printed on presses, or transmitted digitally. Stories shape our perception of reality. They teach lessons, pass knowledge, evoke emotion, and connect us across time. It is also a reminder of our continuity. The voices that traveled through caves, over mountains, and across seas still speak to us today, now amplified by technology. We are part of that same ancient rhythm, hearing, learning, and sharing. Even in the quiet of a modern home, we carry the echoes of thousands of years of storytelling. Every audiobook we play, every digital narrative we stream, every conversation we recount, continues the same human impulse that began long before books existed: to share, preserve, and understand. The written word, the printed book, the modern library, and digital archives all serve one central purpose: to sustain the stories that define humanity. Yet the voyeur recorded, or digital, remains equally vital, reminding us that knowledge is alive, not only in text but in the act of sharing. And so, the continuum of human wisdom is complete, from whispered tales under the stars to high-definition recordings streamed across oceans. Humanity has never stopped preserving, passing, and celebrating knowledge. Each generation adapts, yet the essence of storytelling endures. The past and present are intertwined, reminding us that whether we read, listen, or record, we are participating in a vast, continuous conversation. A conversation that stretches from the first human stories told in caves to the digital narratives of today, and will continue far into the future. As we journey through history, one theme remains clear: humanity's desire to preserve and share knowledge is eternal. From cave walls to scrolls, codices to printed books, and now digital archives, every step reflects a pursuit of memory, of ensuring that ideas, experiences, and discoveries survive the passage of time. Memory, once solely human, has been augmented by technology. Writing allowed thoughts to extend beyond the limits of the mind. Printing multiplied those thoughts across populations. Digital technology has accelerated them exponentially, enabling the storage of vast libraries in tiny devices and the sharing of ideas instantaneously around the globe. Yet, technology is not merely a tool, it is a partner in human curiosity. Every innovation, from the scribe's careful ink to the printed page, from the microfiche to cloud storage, has extended our collective memory. We can now capture not only words, but images, sounds, and entire experiences. Every recorded lecture, every scanned manuscript, every digitized map preserves a facet of human understanding, safeguarding it against loss. At the same time, these advancements challenge us. With so much information available at our fingertips, the human mind must learn not only to access knowledge, but to process it thoughtfully. We must discern, interpret, and reflect, just as scribes did centuries ago when choosing which texts to preserve and how to copy them faithfully. The future of knowledge is likely to blend human memory and technology even more deeply. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and neural interfaces may allow us to experience history, science, and art in immersive ways unimaginable to previous generations. A student might walk through an ancient city, hear the voices of philosophers, or witness the creation of a masterpiece, all reconstructed from historical records and technology. Yet, even as the tools evolve, the human element remains central. Technology can store and transmit, but it cannot understand, interpret, or value knowledge without human guidance. The responsibility to preserve wisdom, contextualize it, and use it meaningfully rests with us. In T-Sensei we continue the work of all those who came before, the earliest storytellers, the scribes who labored over codices, the printers of the Renaissance, the librarians safeguarding archives, and even the digital archivists of today. Each generation contributes to a chain of understanding that stretches across time. Moreover, the digital age has reawakened the ancient principle of accessibility. Knowledge, once the privilege of a few, is increasingly available to many. Online libraries, open-source research, and collaborative platforms allow voices from diverse cultures to participate in the shared human story. This democratization mirrors the oral traditions of the past, where stories were told to communities, and everyone could listen, learn, and contribute. Still, there is a timeless lesson to be remembered. The medium changes, but the essence of knowledge endures. Whether inscribed on stone, inked on parchment, printed in a codex, or stored digitally, knowledge requires care, reflection, and transmission to survive. Without attention and reverence, even the most advanced technologies cannot safeguard wisdom. As we imagine the future, it is comforting to realize that humanity has always adapted, We move from cave walls to scrolls, from codices to printing presses, from libraries to digital archives, and through every transition, the core desire has remained the same: to preserve thought, share ideas, and connect generations across time. Tonight, as you reflect on the journey of knowledge, consider your own role. Every story you remember, every idea you explore, and every lesson you share continues the ancient work of preserving humanity's understanding. You are both a recipient and a participant in a chain that stretches back thousands of years. And perhaps in the quiet moments of reflection or study you may sense the rhythm of history, the soft scratch of ink, the rustle of a scroll, the turning of a codex page, the hum of a printing press, or the gentle glow of a digital screen. It is the heartbeat of knowledge itself, reminding us that memory, once fragile, now flows through us all, carrying wisdom forward into the unknown future. As we arrive at the final chapter of this journey, it is clear that the story of human knowledge has never been linear. It has twisted, expanded, and transformed, like a river carving valleys through time. From the first scratches on cave walls to the vast digital archives of today, humanity has continually sought to remember, to understand, and to share. Knowledge is not just a collection of facts or records. It is a living, breathing companion. It walks beside us in quiet moments, whispers guidance in times of uncertainty, and challenges us to think, reflect, and imagine. It is both intimate and universal, personal and collective. Every book we open, every story we hear, every digital resource we consult links us to countless generations of thinkers, scribes, and storytellers. Consider the first human who carved a symbol into clay or painted a figure on a cave wall. They may not have known the full impact of their act, yet they reached across millennia. They set a precedent that ideas, once expressed, could endure. From that simple act sprang the scrolls of Egypt, the codices of medieval Europe, the printed presses of Gutenberg, and the digital networks that connect our world today. Even now, knowledge continues to evolve. New technologies allow us to store unprecedented amounts of information, analyze it with precision, and share it globally in seconds. Yet, at its core, the essence of knowledge remains the same. Connection, it binds us to our ancestors, to our peers, and to those yet to come. And so, we see that the story is endless. It will continue long after our own lifetimes, as future generations discover, interpret, and expand upon the foundation we leave behind. Every thought recorded, every story told, every lesson shared contributes to an unbroken chain stretching from the dawn of human consciousness to the far future. Tonight, as you rest and reflect, imagine this chain. Picture the earliest storytellers, the scribes by candlelight, the printers in bustling workshops, the librarians arranging shelves, and the digital archivists curating virtual collections. All of them reached across time to share what they knew, felt, and imagined. And now, you are part of that continuum. Knowledge, in all its forms, is both a gift and a responsibility. It is a companion that asks us to listen carefully, to preserve thoughtfully, and to share generously. It teaches us patience, humility, and wonder. It reminds us that while civilizations rise and fall, human curiosity endures. In the quiet of your own space tonight, consider the stories you carry, the lessons you have learned, the ideas that inspire you, the memories that shape your world. They are part of the living history of humanity. By remembering, reflecting, and sharing, you continue the work of countless generations who have sought to preserve the essence of being human. And as you drift toward sleep, let the rhythm of this long journey soothe you. Feel the gentle heartbeat of history in your mind, the scratch of ink, the rustle of a scroll, the turning of pages, the hum of presses, and the soft glow of screens. Let it remind you that knowledge is not merely something we consume, but a companion that has walked beside humanity for thousands of years, guiding us quietly through time. The story of knowledge is endless. It began long before any of us and will continue long after. And tonight, in this quiet moment, you are a part of it, holding the wisdom of the past, participating in the present, and shaping the future. The journey of human understanding never truly ends. It flows on, carried by our curiosity, preserved in our stories, and illuminated in the light of every mind willing to learn. And with that you can rest, knowing that you are part of an unbroken, eternal narrative, a story as infinite as time itself.